The papers in front of me had my signature on them. My signature. Except I'd never signed them. I sat at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning holding a power of attorney document that said I'd voluntarily handed control of every penny I had to my own son. Every account, every property, every medical decision. My name is on those papers in blue ink, written in a hand that looks almost like mine, but isn't. I'm 67 years old. I live in a small craftsman house in Roanoke, Virginia, the same house my late wife Beatrice and I bought back in 1984. I worked 34 years as a structural engineer at a firm downtown, designing bridges mostly, before I retired in 2019. I have one son. His name is Damien. He's 41, married to a woman named Heather, and until that morning at the kitchen table, I would have told you he was a good man. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I loved my son. I still do, in some twisted corner of my chest that won't let go. That's what makes the rest of this story hurt. If he'd been a stranger, if he'd been some con man who walked off the street, I could have handled it cleaner, but he wasn't a stranger. He was the boy I taught to ride a bicycle on the cracked sidewalk in front of our house. He was the kid who slept with a stuffed elephant until he was 9 years old. He was the young man I co-signed for at the University of Virginia, the man whose wedding I paid for, the father of my only granddaughter, Leela. And he tried to take everything from me. It started in the spring. I was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in March. Not Alzheimer's, not yet, but the doctor used the word early a lot, and the word progression. He gave me pamphlets. He recommended a support group. He told me I should make legal arrangements while I still had clear judgment, because the day might come when I couldn't. I drove home that afternoon and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before I could go inside. I called my son that evening. I told him everything. I told him I was scared. He cried on the phone. He said, "Dad, we're going to take care of you. You're not alone." I believed him. A month later, Damien and Heather started coming over more often. They brought casseroles. They mowed my lawn. They sat with me on the porch and asked careful questions about my medications, my routines, my finances. Heather, who has a master's in social work, suggested I make a list of all my accounts so that if something happened, they'd know what to do. I thought it was thoughtful. I made the list. I gave it to her on a yellow legal pad. She thanked me and took it home. I should have known then. I should have felt something shift in the air, but you don't when it's your own boy. You don't see it because you're not looking for it. By June, Damien had started talking about a trust. He said his accountant had recommended one. He said if I put my assets into a revocable trust with him as the trustee, it would simplify things, save on taxes, protect me if my condition got worse. He brought paperwork over one Sunday afternoon. He told me his lawyer had already drafted it. I looked at the cover page. It was 47 pages long. I told him I'd need time to read it. He said, "Dad, take all the time you need. There's no rush." 2 weeks later, he called me from his car. He sounded breathless. He said, "Hey, Dad, the lawyer needs those signatures by Friday, or we have to redo everything. Can you just sign and we'll go over it together this weekend?" I said no. I told him I wasn't comfortable signing something I hadn't read. He got quiet. Then he said, "Sure, Dad, whatever you want." He never brought it up again. That should have been the second warning. The third warning came when my granddaughter Leela called me one Tuesday afternoon. She's 12. She's the sweetest kid you'll ever meet, all elbows and braces and a laugh that sounds like her grandmother's. She said, "Grandpa, Mom says you might not be able to come to my dance recital next month. She said you've been confused lately. Is that true? Are you okay?" I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to my granddaughter ask me if I was losing my mind, and I realized something was very wrong. I told her I was fine, sweetheart. I told her I was fine, sweetheart. I told her I'd absolutely be at her recital. I told her not to worry about Grandpa. After we hung up, I sat in that quiet bedroom for a long time. The next morning, I drove to my bank. Wells Fargo on Franklin Road. I sat down with a young woman named Aisha and asked her to print out all transactions on every account I had with them over the last 6 months. She raised her eyebrows but didn't say anything. She came back with a stack of paper about 2 inches thick. There were 3 withdrawals I hadn't authorized. One for $14,000, one for $9,500, one for $22,000, all going to an account I didn't recognize, with a routing number Aisha said belonged to a different bank entirely. I asked her who had signed for these. She looked at the records. She looked at me. She said, "Sir, these were initiated through a power of attorney we have on file." I told her I'd never granted anyone power of attorney. She pulled up the document on her screen and turned the monitor toward me. There it was, my signature. My name, notarized by someone I had never met, dated 4 months earlier. That was the morning I sat at my kitchen table at 6 a.m. with those papers in front of me. Alicia had given me a printed copy to take home. I sat there in my bathrobe with a cup of coffee gone cold beside me, and I looked at that forged signature for what must have been an hour. I didn't cry. I want to say that clearly. I didn't break down. I just looked at it. And the more I looked at it, the colder I got. Not angry. Cold. There's a difference. Anger is hot. Anger is loud. Anger makes you stupid. Cold is something else. Cold lets you think. By the time the sun was fully up, I had a plan. The first thing I did was call an attorney. Not my regular attorney, because I didn't know who might have been spoken to in this town. I drove 3 hours to Richmond and walked into the office of a man named Eldon Whitfield Marsh, an elder law specialist who'd been recommended to me by an old engineering colleague whose wife had gone through something similar with her brother. I'd called him from a payphone outside a gas station in Lynchburg. I didn't want my cell phone records to show anything. Eldon was in his late 70s, with white hair and reading glasses that hung around his neck on a leather cord. He looked at the documents I'd brought. He looked at them for a long time. Then he set them down and looked at me over the top of his glasses. He said, "Sir, what your son did is a felony in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Forgery, financial exploitation of an older adult, embezzlement through a fiduciary instrument. He's looking at 5 to 10 years if we pursue it. Possibly more if a jury feels strongly. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I told him I did. He said, "I need to ask you a difficult question. What do you want? Do you want him punished? Do you want your money back? Do you want to give him a chance to make this right? These are different paths, and they lead to different places." I sat in his office for a long minute. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked. Outside, a woman was walking a golden retriever past the window. I said, "I want my money back. I want him out of my life. I don't know yet about the rest." Eldon nodded slowly. He said, "Then let's start there." Over the next 3 weeks, with Eldon's help, I did the following things. Quietly, one at a time, like a man laying out tools on a workbench, I revoked the fraudulent power of attorney. We filed it with every institution. We sent certified letters to every bank, every brokerage, every insurance company. I moved my assets. Not all at once, that would have triggered alarms. We did it in pieces, into new accounts at a credit union in Richmond that Damien didn't know existed. By the end of the 3rd week, my checking and savings accounts at Wells Fargo had less than $300 in them combined. I changed my will. The old one left everything to Damien and Heather, with a trust for Lila. The new one left Lila's college fund untouched, $200,000 locked in an irrevocable trust she couldn't access until she turned 25, with Eldon as the trustee. Everything else went to the Roanoke Free Clinic, where Beatrice had volunteered for the last 12 years of her life, and to the Alzheimer's Association. I revoked the medical power of attorney that, as it turned out, had also been forged. I made Eldon my medical proxy. I gave him a copy of my advance directive. I told him under no circumstances was my son to be permitted to make decisions about my care. And then there was the matter of the condo. I should have mentioned this earlier. 2 years before, after Beatrice died, I bought Damien and Heather a condominium in a new development outside of Charlottesville. It was a wedding anniversary gift, sort of. Damien was struggling with his mortgage on their old house. Lila was about to start middle school, and I had the money, so I bought the condo outright, cash. $580,000. I put the deed in my name, with Damien and Heather as occupants. I'd planned to transfer it to them eventually, but I hadn't gotten around to it. After Beatrice died, a lot of things didn't get done. That meant the condo was still legally mine. Damien and Heather had been living there for 2 years, but they didn't own it. I did. I called a realtor in Charlottesville, a woman named Constance. I told her I had a property I wanted to put on the market quietly. No sign in the yard, no open houses. She said she could do that. I told her the occupants didn't know yet. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Sir, I'll need to coordinate showings. They'll have to know eventually." I said, "I'll handle that part." I didn't handle that part. Not yet. I let Constance start marketing the property to her network of investor clients, while Damien and Heather went on with their lives in a home they were about to lose. It took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, Damien called me twice. Once to ask if I'd thought any more about that trust. I told him I was still reading. He said, "Dad, you've had it for months." I told him my eyes weren't what they used to be. He sighed. He said, "Okay, Dad, just let me know." The second time he called, it was the night of Leela's dance recital. He said, "Hey, Dad, listen, about the recital tomorrow. Heather and I have been talking, and we think it might be too much for you. The crowd, the noise. Leela will understand. We'll record it." I sat in my recliner and gripped the armrest hard. I said, "Son, I'm coming." He said, "Dad." I said, "I'm coming to my granddaughter's recital." End of discussion. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Fine, but we're going to talk about this. You can't just override us. Heather and I are trying to look out for you." I told him I'd see him tomorrow, and I hung up. I went to that recital. I sat 3 rows back. Lila spotted me from the stage during the curtain call, and her whole face lit up. She ran off the stage in her purple tutu and threw her arms around my neck, and I felt her warm cheek against my jaw, and I thought, "You're worth all of this. Every bit of it. Whatever has to happen next, you're worth it." Heather watched us from across the lobby with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Something hard. Something calculating. I watched her watch me. We held eye contact for maybe 4 seconds. Then she turned away. 3 days later, the text came. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in my garage rebuilding the carburetor on the 1972 Ford pickup that had belonged to my father. My phone buzzed on the workbench. I wiped my hands on a rag and picked it up. The text was from Damien. It said, "Dad, just so you know, dinner at our place on Sunday is family only. Heather has asked that you not come this week. She's been feeling a lot of stress, and your visits aren't helping. We'll plan something for you another time. Don't take it personally." I read it 3 times. I want to describe what happened in my chest, because I think people who haven't been through this don't understand. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief, exactly. It was a kind of clarity. Like when you've been squinting at something for hours, and you finally find your glasses. Everything in focus, sharp edges, cold light. My son. The boy I talked to fish. The boy I drove 400 miles to pick up from college when he had pneumonia his sophomore year. The boy who held my hand at his mother's funeral. That boy was telling me I wasn't invited to Sunday dinner because his wife had decided I was inconvenient. I sat down on a milk crate in my garage, and I stared at the concrete floor for a while. Then I texted back. Just one word. "Okay." I put the phone down. I went back to the carburetor. That night, I called Constance, the realtor. I said, "Whatever offers we have, take the strongest one. Close as fast as you can. I'll handle the occupants." She said the strongest offer was a cash buyer, an investor from Northern Virginia who wanted to flip it. He could close in 2 weeks. I said, "Do it." I called Eldon next. I told him we were ready to move on the criminal complaint. He asked if I was sure. I said I was sure. He said he'd file paperwork with the Commonwealth's attorney on Monday morning. He also said something I'll never forget. He said, "Sir, once we start this, we can't unstart it. The state will prosecute whether or not you want them to, because the law against elder financial abuse is a public safety statute. You'll be a witness, not a complainant. You won't be able to drop charges." I said, "I understand." The next 2 weeks moved like a slow current pulling everything toward a waterfall. The condo sold. The buyer's wire transfer cleared on a Thursday. I signed the closing documents at a title company in Charlottesville and walked out with a cashier's check for $592,000 and change. I deposited it into my new account at the credit union. I drove home that evening and made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and watched a Braves game on the television with the volume low. The detective from the Roanoke Police Department called me on a Friday. His name was Detective Cordovan. He was polite, soft-spoken, maybe 45 years old. He said they'd been reviewing the documents Eldon had submitted. He said he had some questions for me. He came to my house on Saturday morning, and we sat at the kitchen table where, weeks earlier, I'd first looked at that forged signature. I told him everything: the diagnosis, the list of accounts, the trust paperwork, the forged power of attorney, the withdrawals, the recital, the Sunday dinner text. Detective Cordovan took notes the whole time. When I was done, he closed his notebook and said, "Sir, I have to ask. Is your son aware that any of this is happening? Has he had any chance to explain?" I said no. He said, "Do you want to give him that chance? Sometimes families are able to resolve these things without our involvement." I thought about that for a long moment. I thought about the boy with the stuffed elephant. I thought about the man who held my hand at his mother's funeral. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about Lila asking me if I was losing my mind. I said, "Detective, my son had every chance, every single one. He's the one who decided we were past talking." He nodded. He said, "I understand." He left around noon. He told me an arrest warrant would likely be issued by the end of the following week. That Sunday, the day I wasn't invited to dinner, I drove to the Alzheimer's support group at the Methodist Church on Brambleton Avenue. I'd been going for 2 months by then. There were 8 or 9 regulars. We sat in folding chairs in a fluorescent-lit room and drank bad coffee and talked about our diagnoses or our spouse's diagnoses, or the small daily indignities of watching your mind become a stranger. That afternoon, a new woman came. She was 63. Her name was Marguerite Albright. She'd been a librarian for 35 years at the public library downtown. Her husband had died of early-onset Alzheimer's 18 months before. She'd been his sole caregiver for the last 4 years of his life, and now, she said, she was finally trying to figure out how to live as just herself again. She had silver hair cut short, and she wore reading glasses on a chain, just like Eldon's. And when she laughed, it was the first real laugh I'd heard in months. After the meeting, we stood in the parking lot for almost an hour, talking. She told me she'd been a quilter for 30 years. She told me she'd never learned to drive a stick shift, which had been a source of mild marital tension. She told me her late husband had loved old trucks. I told her about my father's 1972 Ford pickup. She said, "I'd love to see it sometime, if you wouldn't mind." I said I'd like that. The arrest happened on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't there, but Eldon called me afterward to walk me through it. 2 Roanoke County deputies went to Damien's office, where he worked as a regional manager for an insurance company. They asked him to step outside. They placed him in handcuffs in the parking lot. He was taken to the county jail, processed, and held overnight on charges of forgery, financial exploitation of an older adult, and aggravated identity theft. Heather was not arrested, though Eldon told me the investigation was continuing and additional charges were possible. Damien called me from the jail that night. He used his one phone call on me. I knew it was him because the caller ID said the jail's number, and I'd been told to expect it. I answered. He said, "Dad." I said, "Hello, son." He said, "Dad, what the hell is happening?" "They're saying I forged your signature." They're saying I stole from you. Dad, please. This is a misunderstanding. Tell them this is a mistake. Heather and I were trying to help you. I listened to him. I let him talk. He talked for almost 2 minutes straight, his voice rising and breaking. He talked about how I must be confused. He said the medication was affecting me. He said Heather was beside herself. He said Lila was crying. He said I had to fix this. When he finished, I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "Son, I'm not confused. I went to the bank. I saw the withdrawals. I saw the forged signature. I have an attorney. I have a detective. I have an attorney. I have a detective. I have a notarized affidavit. I'm not confused at all." He started to cry. I could hear it through the phone, the same crying I had heard the night I told him about the diagnosis. Except this time it was different. This time it wasn't for me. He said, "Dad, please. I'll pay it back. Every penny. Just tell them to drop the charges. We can work this out as a family." I said, "Son, the charges aren't mine to drop. And even if they were, I wouldn't drop them. You weren't trying to help me. You were trying to take what I have. And what's worse, you used my granddaughter against me. You told her I was losing my mind so she'd be ready when you took control. You poisoned the well between me and the one person who has nothing to do with any of this." He started to argue. I cut him off. I said, "I'm going to hang up now. I love you, son. I want you to understand that. I have loved you every day of your life, and I will love you every day until I die. But I'm not going to let you destroy me, and I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. You will face what you did, and maybe, on the other side of that, we will figure out what kind of relationship is possible between us. But it won't be this. Not ever again." I hung up. I sat in my recliner and looked at the wall for a long time. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and made myself dinner. There's a part of this story I haven't told you yet, and I want to tell it now because it matters. About a week after Damien's arrest, while he was out on bond awaiting trial, Heather drove to my house. It was a Tuesday evening. She didn't call ahead. I heard her car pull into the driveway and I went out onto the porch. She got out of her SUV. She didn't say hello. She walked up the front walk and stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me. She said, "You ruined our lives. I hope you're proud of yourself." I looked at her. I said, "Heather, your husband forged my name on legal documents and stole $60,000 from me. Your husband poisoned my granddaughter against me. Your husband told me not to come to a family dinner because you decided I was inconvenient. I didn't ruin anything. He did. You did. I am the one whose life was being stolen, and I am the one who said no. So you can stand in my yard and yell at me if you want, but you're going to have to find a different villain for the story you're telling yourself." She stared at me. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. Then she said, "Lila is never going to see you again. I'll make sure of it." I felt something break loose inside me when she said that. Not anger. Something deeper. I said, "Heather, that's between you and the courts. I have a granddaughter. She has a grandfather. She has a grandfather. You don't get to write her out of that just because you're angry. I have an attorney. He's already preparing visitation paperwork. We'll see what a judge has to say." She got back in her SUV and drove away. I called Eldon the next morning. He told me Virginia has grandparent visitation laws and that, given the circumstances, we had a strong case. He filed the paperwork that afternoon. The custody hearing was 3 months later. By that point, Damien had pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence of 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2. He was at Powhatan Correctional Center, about an hour east of Richmond. Heather had filed for divorce. She'd moved with Lila to her mother's house in North Carolina. I drove to the hearing in Roanoke. Eldon was beside me. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Honorable Marlene Chastain. She read the briefs. She listened to Heather's attorney. She listened to Eldon. Then she asked to speak to Lila privately in her chambers. They were in there for 45 minutes. When they came out, Lila walked over to me. She was 13 by then, taller than the last time I'd seen her, her braces gone. She climbed into the chair next to mine and laid her head on my shoulder. Judge Chastain looked at Heather. Then she looked at me. Then she said, "Grandparent visitation is granted. Weekends at the grandfather's residence. 2 weeks in summer. Phone calls without supervision. This is not negotiable." Heather started to object. The judge silenced her with a look. "That was 18 months ago. Leela comes to see me every other weekend. We work on the truck together. She's a better mechanic than her father ever was, and I tell her so. She's 14 now. She wants to be a veterinarian. She knows what her father did, because we don't lie to her. We don't make him a monster, but we don't pretend it didn't happen. She has visited him once at Powhatan with her mother. She told me afterward that he cried the whole time. She told me she doesn't know how she feels yet, and I told her that's okay. You don't have to know yet. You have your whole life to figure that out. Marguerite and I have been seeing each other for about a year. She moved into the Craftsman last spring. We didn't get married. Neither of us felt the need. We just lived together, two old people in a quiet house, working on her quilts and my truck and reading on the porch in the evenings. Leela adores her. Marguerite has taught her how to make blackberry pie, and how to thread a sewing machine, and how to tell when a peach is ripe. My cognitive impairment has progressed slightly in the 2 years since my diagnosis. I forget words sometimes. I lost my keys for an entire weekend last month and found them in the freezer. The doctor says I'm doing well, considering he says the support of family and good legal protection has made a measurable difference. I take that as a compliment to Marguerite and Eldon and Lila, more than to me. I want to say one more thing before I'm done. People have asked me, when I've told this story in support groups and in conversations with neighbors who've gone through their own versions of it, whether I regret it, whether I'm sorry I sent my own son to prison, whether I think I went too far. I'll tell you what I tell them. I didn't send my son to prison. He sent himself there. He made every choice that led him to that place. He forged my signature. He stole from me. He used my granddaughter against me. He decided I was a problem to be managed, rather than a father to be loved. I just stopped pretending those things weren't happening. The hardest part of this whole story wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the legal proceedings. It wasn't even the moment I picked up the phone to authorize the criminal complaint. The hardest part was accepting that the boy I raised had become a man who would do those things, and that no amount of love from me could change what he had chosen. I could love him. I do love him. I write to him at Powhatan every 2 weeks, and sometimes he writes back, but I cannot save him from what he became. I can only protect myself from it, and protect Lila from it, and hope that someday, on the other side of his sentence, the man who comes out is closer to the boy I remember than the man who texted me out of a Sunday dinner. If you're watching this and something in it sounds familiar, I want to tell you something. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to say no, even to your children, especially to your children. Love is not a permission slip for abuse. Family is not a hostage situation. The people who love you do not steal from you. The people who love you do not use your grandchildren as weapons. The people who love you do not text you out of dinner because their spouse is uncomfortable with your existence. Get a lawyer, not a family friend, a real lawyer who specializes in elder law. Make a will. Make it specific. Update it. Get a power of attorney with someone you trust and make sure your bank knows about it. Watch your accounts. Watch your mail. Watch the people who suddenly take an interest in your finances after a diagnosis. And if it happens to you, the way it happened to me, I want you to know you're not alone, and you're not crazy, and you're not wrong to do what needs to be done. You raised them. You loved them. You did your part. What they do with the life you gave them is on them. My name is Wexford Halbrook. I'm 67 years old. I live in Roanoke, Virginia, in a Craftsman house I bought in 1984. I have a granddaughter named Lila. a woman named Marguerite who I love, an old truck that runs better every year, and a son in prison who I still pray for every night. I lost a lot, but I kept what mattered, and I'd do it again. I've had 2 years to sit with what happened, and I want to share what those years have taught me, because the lessons didn't come easy, and I don't want anyone else to learn them the same hard way I did. The first thing I understand now is that every choice my son Damien made was a seed, and every seed grew into exactly what it was planted to be. When he forged my signature, he wasn't just stealing money. He was planting the day a deputy would put handcuffs on him in his office parking lot. When he told my granddaughter Lila that I was losing my mind, he was planting the day she would sit in a judge's chambers and tell that judge she wanted to see me anyway. And when he texted me out of Sunday dinner, he was planting the day a stranger from Northern Virginia would wire me $592,000 for the condo my son thought was his. Nothing in this story happened by accident. He built it, brick by brick, with his own 2 hands. I just stopped catching the bricks when he threw them at me. The second thing I understand is that love and self-respect are not opposites. I spent the first 65 years of my life believing that if I really loved someone, I had to absorb whatever they did to me. That's not love. That's a contract you sign with your own diminishment. Real love says no. Real love protects the next generation from the patterns the last generation tolerated. When I let Lila see me stand up to her parents, I gave her something my own father never gave me. I gave her permission to do the same someday, if she ever needs to. The third thing I understand is that getting old does not mean getting weak. There's a quiet strength that comes from knowing you've lived long enough to recognize a wolf, even when the wolf is wearing your own son's face. I was scared the morning I sat at that kitchen table with the forged power of attorney in my hands. I was scared every step after that, but I kept moving. I drove to Richmond. I called Eldon. I changed my accounts. I sold the condo. I went to the recital. I answered that collect call from the jail. Courage isn't the absence of fear, friends. Courage is doing the next right thing while your hands are still shaking. The last thing I'll say is this. Take care of your mind while you still have one. Take care of your mind while you still have one. Take care of your money before someone takes it for you. Talk to your grandchildren directly, without your children as middlemen, because the truth has a way of surviving when you speak it plainly. And if the people who are supposed to love you start treating you like an obstacle, believe them the first time. Don't make them prove it twice. I lost my son, but I kept myself. And in the end, that was the only thing I ever truly owned.